I mean, maybe that's a bit extreme, but it's true.
Well, that actually was one of the arguments, again, from the folks in favor of Prop 8, is that well, not specifically, but that the African American community in large part came out and voted in favor of Prop 8, rejecting same-sex marriage. And what they're reading into that is that the argument that the marriage equality activists were making, that same-sex marriage is stopping same-sex marriage is the same kind of perversion of equal rights that stopping interracial couples from getting married was in its time. And the folks that supported Prop 8 are saying, well, obviously the black community rejected that argument. What's interesting is when you listen to them actually make that argument, what they say is that the black community in California, the African American community, doesn't believe that the way you act and behave is the same as the color of your skin. So, I mean, in their own argument, when they talk about it, they're talking about being gay, being homosexual, being in a same-sex relationship, being bi, is an action. It's something you do. It's something you choose to do.
Yeah.
And it's missing the whole notion that these people can't choose to not be gay or bisexual any more than the heterosexual folks can choose not to be heterosexual.
Interesting.
So the question is, all right, so they should not act on it?
Yeah.
It's still cheating if if a guy's married to a woman and he has sex with another guy. It's still cheating. It's still grounds for annulment. So why isn't it grounds for marriage?
It's crazy. Here's the question I have with that whole thing. If we say that the black community rejected this because the majority of blacks voted for Prop 8, well, does that mean that it was a minority of everybody else that voted for Prop 8? Because I don't think that's a fair argument to say that they rejected it if they voted for it in the same proportions, the same numbers that everybody else did. I think that's suggesting that they should have a higher degree of sensitivity, and they probably should. But from a legal standpoint, are you required to have a higher degree of sensitivity?
Just because, well, we've talked about this before, just because you fall into a social minority group of one type or another doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be sensitive to the struggles of another minority group. On top of which, there are obviously folks that take exception with that interpretation. There are the numbers of blacks that voted for it and voted against it. The reasons why they did what they did, statistics can only guess at the reasons why they did. These folks are reading into it that if more of them voted against it than voted for it, then as a race they must have rejected the notion. And there's all kinds of other issues that come into play when you look at the campaign around Prop 8, the propaganda around Prop 8 that was going on, the religious commercials that were going on. When folks were going to church, when folks were going to social groups, the commercials that were on television, in different commercials in different socioeconomic areas, all designed around scaring people one way or another, or convincing them that this is an immoral thing.
Right, it's the end of the world. God.
The motivations behind people voting, you can influence large communities, any large community, through propaganda and commercials.
Yeah. We know this to be true. History is ripe with this.
Recent history here in Connecticut is ripe with this.
It's just, wow.
Yep. The failure this year to get the Judiciary Committee to support a gender identity and expression in the anti-discrimination bill.
That's right. We are very disappointed about that. But next year, guess what? We're gonna get that thing through next year, whatever it takes. I'm gonna be camped out on somebody's doorstep next year. I am.
They've been for the folks that are at home that aren't familiar with the effort. This was the fourth year that the bill's gone up in front of the state Senate, state Congress in one form or another. It's had increasing support every year. Last year, it had overwhelming support in both houses. The Senate passed it 30-4. It's a pretty overwhelming number.
Pretty overwhelming, yeah.
And it was destined for a House vote, but it was a short session, and the state budget kind of takes precedence over, the Anti-Discrimination Act.
Yeah.
So understandably, it didn't make it. It didn't have the political will to get pushed to the floor vote in the last couple of weeks. And this year, it didn't even get brought up in the committee, Judiciary Committee. There was a lot of pressure from right-wing groups, the Roman Catholic Church and the Family Institute of Connecticut,
the
to
FIC,
squash it.
Our friends, the FIC, who have a standing invitation to come on our show and talk about this, explain to us exactly why we're abominations. Because, I can argue that.
When you look at the FIC website, they talk about how the FIC stands for religious freedom and family values. And then you look at all of the things that they say about people that aren't like them.
Right.
And you have to wonder what values they're actually supporting in the family.
Yeah.
How do you define family? Most of the stuff on their website talks about a mother and a father and their biological offspring.
Yeah.
And it talks at length about how better children, how much better children are when they're raised by their biological mother and biological father.
Oh, really?
Yes. And unfortunately, what there are little ellipses throughout. What they're not clear on is that most of the studies that they're referencing, I believe, are talking about raised by their biological parents as opposed to
wolves.
As opposed to wolves.
Right.
As opposed to a single parent.
Right.
And single parents have it tough, and a lot of them do an awesome job. I would believe, however, that the statistics are there to support that a dual-parent household has more resources available to spend on their kids.
Clearly, that's what we would like to see. We want to see a dual-parent household. We want to see kids raised by their parents. Sometimes it's not possible. It's just not. It's not always possible. And the notion that a child is going to be hurt because they're being raised by somebody other than their biological parent, no matter who that happens to be, is an absurdity. We have, God, just simple observation. We empirically know this to be true just by simple observation. Well,
I'm always fascinated by the twists on the arguments. In California, they'd put out a commercial on YouTube about. They took the information from the Prop 8 website, which made arguments about the strength of the marriage and how much better kids do when they grow up in a married household, and how much better people's health are when they grow up when they stay married and things like that. And they said, well, if the issue is a heterosexual marriage, that's the important thing in California, then we should just abolish divorce. That would be the next logical step, is abolish divorce. And that would force people to stay in, no, I mean, at that point, people obviously see through it and say, no, that's an unhealthy relationship. They need to be apart. And it's like, well, then there's something flawed in your argument if the natural conclusion from your argument leads you to something absurd.
Yeah. Very good. Very well said. Yeah. So that's all. It's pretty crazy. But this year we are going to get that bill passed.